The first thing that shattered her mind was not the pain, but the question. Because as the human knelt between her shaking legs and asked softly if he could touch her, the universe itself seemed to pause, confused by an act of mercy where cruelty was expected. Her name was Nerith, though no one had used it kindly in her entire life, and she lay half buried in ash and frozen soil at the edge of a ruined city, her thin body twisted by a birth flaw that bent her legs inward and marked her as defective among her people. On her world, weakness was treated as contamination, and from the moment she learned to walk, she learned to be ashamed. Dragged behind others, mocked, beaten, and finally exiled when war came. Chained outside the city walls, so the approaching humans would kill her first, and spare the strong the inconvenience of compassion. When the bombardment ended and silence fell, she was still breathing. Abandoned by her own kind and discovered by a human patrol who argued over whether she was a trap, a curse, or simply not worth the risk, until a young medic named Elias ignored orders and carried her away as gunfire echoed in the distance. Now she lay inside a temporary shelter built from metal scraps and fear, starving, feverish, and certain that this was only a slower execution, because every being she had ever met treated her body as something to be controlled, punished, or claimed. When Elias opened his medical kit and explained that her damaged nerves were failing and that he needed to inject a stabilizer deep into the inner muscles of her legs, Nerith recoiled in terror and lashed out with words sharp enough to wound, accusing him of planning to brand her, hurt her, or take something she had never been allowed to own. He did not shout. He did not restrain her. He simply met her eyes and waited, bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his side, explaining in broken, simple sentences that if he did nothing, she would lose the ability to move forever. And that waiting was the hardest thing she had ever endured, because patience felt more dangerous than violence. She finally nodded, tears mixing with dust. And when the needle pierced her flesh, the pain exploded through her nerves, dragging memories with it of being held down by her own people, of laughter as she cried, of being told she was less than alive. She screamed, not because of the injection, but because Elias kept apologizing, because his hands shook with fear for her rather than power over her, and because no one had ever stayed present with her pain before. Outside the shelter, human commanders argued through static-filled radios, demanding the alien be terminated before reinforcements arrived, while from the ruins her own species' hunters closed in, sent to erase the shame of her survival and ensure she died forgotten. The stabilizer worked for only moments before her legs went numb again, and Elias knew the truth then, his face falling as he checked the readings and realized he had one final dose left. A dose meant to save himself from the radiation poisoning already creeping through his veins. The ground shook as enemy fire drew closer. Alarm screamed, and Nerith saw the conflict in his eyes, a battle between duty and something deeper, and she whispered that he should save himself, because beings like her were meant to be left behind. Elias smiled sadly and said that humans were terrible at following rules when they felt something was wrong, and before she could stop him, he injected the last dose into her legs, sealing his own fate. Strength flooded her body in a way she had never known, her muscles responding, her balance steadying, her legs straightening as if the universe itself had finally corrected a mistake. And she stared at him in horror as he collapsed, the cost of her life written across his pale face. Explosions tore through the shelter as alien hunters burst inside, weapons raised, only to freeze when they saw Nerith standing tall for the first time, holding a dying human against her chest, not as a captive, but as something precious. Human soldiers shouted to fire, alien voices screamed to kill her, and for a single suspended moment, both sides hesitated, because neither could understand what they were seeing. A creature once deemed broken, choosing to protect the enemy who had saved her without demand or reward. Nearith ran through smoke and snow, carrying Elias with legs that burned but did not fail, chased by drones, bullets, and memories, until she reached the edge of the human evacuation zone and collapsed as dawn broke across the battlefield. Elias died in her arms with a quiet smile, whispering that he was glad he got to see her stand. And that was when she finally understood what human intimacy truly was, not the closeness of bodies, but the courage to give without ownership, to care without control, to see worth where the world had decided there was none. When the war reports were written, they spoke of ceasefires and casualties, of tactics and territory, but they did not record the moment humans lowered their weapons when they saw her refuse to fight, or the moment alien soldiers questioned their gods when they saw one of their cursed walk unafraid. Nearith was taken in by humans not as a prisoner, but as a witness, and every step she took afterward carried the weight of Elias's sacrifice, a reminder that survival was not granted by strength alone. In time she spoke before councils and commanders, her voice steady, her presence undeniable, and though hatred did not vanish and fear did not die easily, something fragile began to grow in its place. She remained marked by scars, by grief, by the knowledge that kindness had cost a good man his life, but she refused to let that sacrifice become meaningless. In a universe that hunted the weak and worshipped power, Nearith became a living challenge to both, proof that humanity's greatest weapon was not its fleets or fire, but its willingness to kneel before the broken and ask, with trembling hands, if it could help.